You know, if your overly strict Christian parents had a big problem with wizards casting spells in this game, imagine what it's going to be like whenever they hear about this class. In D&D, all spellcasters have a manner in which they acquire their magical power. You have clerics that get it from a divine god, wizards that get it through a study of the arcane, sorcerers that are just naturally born with it, and then warlocks that gash their hand open and sacrifice a chicken in order to talk to a little imp that gives them their powers from the nine hells. Whenever I was first getting into D&D, it was easy for me to see how a subclass for this in like the Great Old One and the Fiend made a whole lot of sense, right? Because like Warlock seems to be that black metal, really dark, kind of grim, magical spellcaster. But then I looked at the Archfey and I was like, wait, I wasn't really quite making the connection. And then it like kind of expanded my mind into like what a warlock could really be. You know, they're not always going to be these like, I am a motherfucking demon. This totally makes sense as a warlock patron, because the Feywild can be this dreamy, sort of indescribable sort of an area, and those that preside over it must embody these sorts of qualities, right? Of like possible existential dread, just mind-breaking but beguiling characteristics that like, it's kind of hard to describe and almost eldritch in its own way. If you've ever wanted your Eldritch Blast to shoot out glitter and dragonflies, the Archfey is the perfect warlock patron for you, so let's go check this thing out over on D&D Beyond. Your patron is a lord or lady of the Fey, a creature of legend who holds the secrets that were forgotten before the mortal races were born. This being's motivations are often inscrutable, and sometimes whimsical. It might involve a striving or greater magical power, or the settling of age-old grudges. Beings of this sort include the Prince of Frost, the Queen of Air and Darkness, ruler of the Gloaming Court, Titania of the Summer Court, her consort Oberon, the Green Lord, Hyrsam, the Prince of Fools, and ancient hags. Starting off at first level, your spell list is expanded, and that's a little bit weaker. These like expanded spell lists for Warlock are weaker than the expanded spells for like Cleric or Sorcerer, because these do count against the number of spells that you know, and you have to take them as a part of like preparing your spells. And here at first level, you're only getting 2 spells that you know. So like I usually think as a first level spell, what's it going to be worth for me to take over taking Hex, right? So here at first level, they have Fairy Fire and Sleep. So I've talked about both of these spells before, both fantastic spells. The problem that I have with Fairy Fire here is that Hex does require your concentration, and Fairy Fire requiring your concentration makes me think that you're going to have to make this like judgment call of either like, do I want my Eldritch Blast to hit harder, in which case I'll take Hex? Do I want them to be easier to hit, in which case I'll take Fairy Fire? While Fairy Fire completely makes sense for it, right? Like, of course, the Archfey should get Fairy Fire. The problem is just that Hex exists, and it's also a first level spell that also requires your concentration. So I think that Fairy Fire might just be worse here on this Warlock. I'm actually editing this, and I think that I can think of an argument for Fairy Fire now, where I'm like, this gets a little bit better whenever you get another bolt for Eldritch Blast, right? Like, at 5th level, you're getting advantage on more of the bolts. It does require action to set up. I still think that Fairy Fire at first level is one that I wouldn't pick over Hex, but I did glaze over that there is some power to be said for Fairy Fire's interaction with Eldritch Blast as opposed to how Hex does with Eldritch Blast. Anyways, so yeah, moving on. Sleep, this is just such a great control spell here at first level. Like, straight up, roll 5d8. The total is how many hit points the creatures that the spell can affect. Creatures within 20 feet of a point that you choose within range are affected in ascending order of the current hit points. And then they fall unconscious. Like, oh man, if they go below that threshold, this is always going to act like as optimally for you as possible. Like, here at first level, it's going to be very, very common that you're going to run up against hordes of goblins or kobolds. Sleep is a real easy way to like either get yourself out of big trouble or set it up to where it's going to be a lot easier for your allies to go in and ensure a crit on these enemies. So Sleep is one that I would really, really recommend that you take at first level alongside Hex if you want to go for the real high damaging Eldritch Blasts. Or like I said, Fairy Fire if you're just trying to act as more of the debuffer sort of a warlock. Calm emotions and phantasmal force that they're able to get here as soon as you get access to second level spells. Again, these are both competing for your concentration, and like depending on how you're trying to perform as a warlock, right? Like what is your role? If you're going for the debuffer, then like you've got a lot of stuff that's competing for your concentration right here. But like if you're going for the blaster, it's kind of hard not to just take Hex and just prioritize casting Hex. The Hex isn't always going to be like the best thing to use in absolutely every situation. I totally acknowledge that, but it's going to be the great spell to use in most combat situations. So again, unfortunately, like I just think that both of these spells competing for your concentration, they're going to be weaker just because they just don't make great sense on a warlock. Whenever you get access to third level spells, you can get Blink and Plant Growth. Plant Growth I've given a blue because while this spell is amazing in natural terrain, like, you know, non-mountainous stuff, if we're talking forests or jungles, swamps, this spell is absurdly good at zoning, right? All normal plants and a 100-foot radius centered on this point within 150 feet become thick and overgrown. A creature moving through the area must spend 4 feet of movement for every 1 foot it moves. It's just like super powerful, difficult terrain, right? Now, in those spots, and those spots do happen fairly often, this is going to be a crazy awesome zoning tool for you to use, and one that I am very happy that the Archfey gets, but I am giving it a blue because not every single combat encounter is going to have naturally growing foliage around you. Now, Blink is one that, unfortunately, I think is just unreliable. It's a third level spell. The duration of a minute. It doesn't require your concentration. And everything it does sounds really cool, right? Blink is such an odd case because I want this spell to be so cool, right? Roll a d20 at the end of each of your turns for the duration of the spell. On a roll of 11 or higher, you vanish from your current plane of existence and appear in the ethereal plane at the start of each of your turns, and when the spell ends, if you are on the ethereal plane, you return to an unoccupied space of your choice that you can see within 10 feet of the space where you vanish from. If no unoccupied space is available within that range, you appear in the nearest unoccupied space, chosen at random. If more than one space is equally near, you can dismiss the spell as an action. While on the ethereal plane, you can see and hear the plane you originated from, which is cast in shades of gray, and you can't see anything more than 60 feet away. You can only affect and be affected by other creatures on the ethereal plane. Creatures that aren't there can't perceive you or interact with you unless they have the ability to do so. So Blink is like, you cast this, it doesn't require your concentration, and then like on a basically it's a 50-50 shot. On a roll of 11 or higher, you vanish from your current plane of existence, and then at the start of your next turn, you can choose to appear in an unoccupied space that you can see within 10 feet of the spot. Like, it's a cool effect, but I'm just not a big fan of Blink being pretty, like, unreliable, right? Like, half the time, this is a pretty cool positioning tool, and it's a great defensive maneuver, and you can get in and out of harm's way with it. It sounds pretty dope, but like I just don't like the fact that Blink is unreliable. At the cost of a third level spell, especially for Warlock, that's really, really expensive. You know, if you do this and it's just not working for you in combat, like you just get pretty unlucky rolls, then like it just feels like you've wasted one of your pretty precious Warlock spell slots. So like I'm just really not a big fan of Blink, and I'm even less of a fan of it offered to you as just like something that you can take and you have to prepare as a Warlock. Dominate Beast, like, again, thinking of these as like Warlock spells, like as a 4th level spell that requires your concentration, it's competing for a whole bunch of other stuff that you want to do. It only works on beasts, and they're charmed by you for the duration. It's like, I just don't think that Dominate Beast, while you might get this cool, like, beast that can, you know, obey your commands and do whatnot, like, again, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense as a Warlock spell. Greater Invisibility. Here we have a spell, the first spell, I think, on this entire list that I think is worth possibly dropping Hex in order to get the concentration on this to cast. So, you or a creature you touch becomes invisible until the spell ends. Anything the target is wearing or carrying is invisible as long as it's on the target's person. notice that this doesn't end whenever you make an attack roll or deal damage or force a creature to make a saving throw or anything. As long as you maintain your concentration on this, for that minute, the creature is invisible. This is such a great spell. I absolutely love this. Great for like helping you get out of harm's way if you just really, really need it. This is an amazing escape tool. They do already have a really good escape tool here in the subclass, but here, Greater Invisibility, I do think that you're going to consider either casting Hex or casting this. Dominate Person, again, situational 5th level spell requiring your concentration. You're going to have to prepare it as a Warlock. Yeah, I just don't think that it's really worth it. Actually, so much so, like, it is situational. It is like, yeah, I am going to bring that down to an orange. Seeming I had kind of undervalued. Thinking about this on a Warlock, it actually sounds a lot better because if the duration is 8 hours, casting time of 1 action, you do regain your spell slots on a short rest. So it could be worth it to cast Seeming. You cloak up your party and do whatever, and then you regain the spell slot. So Seeming is actually a little bit better as a Warlock spell. So I'm going to move that up to purple. I initially had it as blue, thinking that there's certain situations in which this is good, but because this has a duration of 8 hours and you get your spell slots back on a short rest, I think that Seeming, specifically on Warlock, is a purple spell. Okay, so here at first level to get Fey Presence. Starting at first level, your patron bestows upon you the ability to project the beguiling and fearsome presence of the Fey. As an action, you can cause each creature in a 10-foot cube originating from you to make a wisdom saving throw against your Warlock spell save DC. The creatures that fail their saving throws are all charmed or frightened by you, your choice, until the end of your next turn. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So Fey Presence, I think of this as very strictly a defensive kind of a tool here. And it's the only thing that you're going to get other than your expanded spells at first level. So this feature is a little odd. It is straight up like you having to use your action to do something defensively to escape that I just think I think I would rather just use disengage to escape there, because that's not relying on the wisdom saving throw. That's straight up, I can disengage and I'm not going to take attacks of opportunity. Bam, and I do that. Or I can put myself in harm's way, use my action to do this, and then maybe cause those things to be charmed by me until the end of my next turn, in which case then I'll be able to I can do Eldritch Blast or do whatever to these things. But Eldritch Blast is going to be Fey Presence seems to me like this is just worse than using disengage. I realize that this can charm creatures can't be charmed by charmed person, it's effectively you're getting the effect of charm monster at first level. So if you make that argument, it does sound like you could say that this is you're getting a limited use of a 4th level spell. In a way, it's super restrictive. I just think Fey Presence would make a lot more sense as a reaction. If you were able to do this as a reaction whenever a creature comes within 10 feet of you, bam, you can do this. I would think that this is super, super good. And maybe if you got 2 uses of it that refresh on a short or long rest, I would think that this is an amazing, amazing feature. But I do think that it's very limited in its use. I think that the ways in which I can really think about using it just sound really situational. And then being charmed or frightened falls off at later levels. You get to the point where you're at 9th level and above, and most creatures with a CR 9 or above are just straight up immune to being charmed or frightened. So Fey Presence is, I've got to say, because of its restrictions and its mechanical usage, and then the fact that it does fall off at later levels, I'm going to bring that one down to orange. Misty Escape is such a cool feature. I love this. Starting at 6th level, you can vanish in a puff of mist in response to harm. When you take damage, you can use your reaction to turn invisible and teleport up to 60 feet to an unoccupied space that you can see. You remain invisible until the start of your next turn or until you attack or cast a spell. Once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or long rest. So I love this. I love this ability. I think that this could be given to you at first level. Maybe be a little bit restrictive. Maybe have it cost your bonus action. So that way, like, you're kind of having to choose on your first turn whether or not you want to, like, get into position to do a thing or, you know, use Hex on something. You use Hex, and then, like, afterwards, this would give you something to use as your bonus action while you're maintaining Hex. Because the bonus action for Warlock, after you've already cast Hex, is mostly wasted. Because there's not a whole lot of other stuff you can do unless you multi-class over into something else to get something on your bonus action. So I think Misty Escape, I would have loved to have seen this as, like, especially after Tasha's, right? Maybe getting a scaling use of this that you can start doing at first level, and then use it as a bonus action, or possibly as a reaction. And this part, whenever you take damage, so something bad has to happen to you before you can use this feature. And like, I would say that Misty Escape should be a little bit less restrictive than this, possibly offered a little bit earlier. And I don't know, maybe whenever I get into my fix on that, I'll talk about that in another live stream. But yeah, Misty Escape, I do like the feature. I do think it's a little bit restrictive. I do wish it was offered a little bit earlier. But it is strong. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna bring it down just to blue, just because this, like, when you take damage, yeah, I think that that's a pretty bad restriction to have on something like this. Beguiling Defenses is something that is immediately made weaker after Tasha's was released because the Fey Wanderer was in there, and the Fey Wanderer has a feature that just shows, like, how you could do an effect like this and just improve, like, make it mechanically function so much better. Beginning at 10th level, your patron teaches you how to turn the mind-affecting magic of your enemies against them. You're immune to being charmed. Awesome benefit right there. And when another creature attempts to charm you, you can use your reaction to attempt to turn the charm back on that creature. The creature must succeed on a wisdom saving throw against your Warlock's spell save DC, or be charmed by you for 1 minute, or until the creature takes any damage. Okay, so Beguiling Defenses. First off, this is another thing competing for your reaction as one of your subclass features. And, like, sure, you can say that, well, if you've already used Misty Escape, then this gives you something else that you can do as a reaction, right? Well, like, sure, but that thing has to attempt to charm you specifically. If there are no creatures in combat that are capable of charming something else, then you just don't have a feature. Like, straight up, you just don't have a feature. Or, like, you can have an ally attempt to charm you, in which case you can turn the charm back on that ally. Beguiling Defenses just doesn't really operate all that well. Let me compare this over to the Fey Wanderer's 7th level feature. Beguiling Twist. The magic of the Feywild guards your mind. You have advantage on saving throws against being charmed or frightened. I would so much rather have this than immunity to being charmed. This is going to come into play way, way, way more often. In addition, whenever you or a creature you can see within 120 feet of you succeeds on a saving throw against being charmed or frightened, you can use your reaction to force a different creature you can see within 120 feet of you to make a wisdom saving throw against your spell save DC. If the save fails, the target is charmed or frightened by you, your choice, for 1 minute. The target can repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. The Fey Wanderer is straight up a better Archfey than the Archfey. Like, but one thing I would do, if I'm going to give my fixes on this one, because I think that the Archfey needs a lot of help, is straight up give them this same feature right here offered at 6th level. This would make it to where if you're using a lot of, like, charm persons or, whatever spells, to make it a little bit easier for your charming effects to go off, I just think that it really just needs to pull that feature wholesale over to this subclass. Dark Delirium is another one I've marked in orange. Starting at 14th level, you can plunge a creature into an illusory realm. As an action, choose a creature that you can see within 60 feet of you. It must make a wisdom saving throw against your Warlock spell save DC. On a failed save, it is charmed or frightened by you, your choice, for 1 minute, or until your concentration is broken, as if you're concentrating on a spell. This effect ends early if the creature takes any damage. Until the illusion ends, The creature thinks it's lost in a misty realm, the appearance of which you choose. The creature can see and hear only itself, you, and the illusion. You must finish a short or long rest before you can use this feature again. Okay, so again, 14th level. And I'm just going to keep echoing this thing. There are like over 77% of the creatures of CR9 and above are immune to being charmed. And there's even more than that are immune to being frightened. So like, if you use this feature on it, and like, if you use this feature on it and it doesn't work because you chose charmed and it's immune to being charmed, but it's not immune to being frightened, then it feels frustrating because you just blew your big capstone for the encounter to get what feels like a pretty minor effect. Like, it's a nice kind of a control thing, but like, in Dark Delirium, just compared to like what some of the other subclasses get, this just falls super, super short. It's not even offering a comparable amount of power in comparison to the other ones. Like, let's look at, I don't know. Okay, Hurl Through Hell for the Fiend is a great banishment tool. Like, it gives you some control right there, as well as, at the end of its next turn, the target returns to the space it previously occupied or the nearest unoccupied space. If the target is not a fiend, it takes 10d10 psychic damage as it reels from its horrific experience. Now, sure, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest, but like, geez, I would so much rather have this once per session than have this even thought of as once per encounter. Like, oh man, Dark Delirium offered at 14th level. I just don't think that this capstone is really worth it at all. So the Archfey, I had initially given a rating to based off of what I had seen in like lower level play. I'd never seen anyone really play an Archfey up to like 12th level. So I'm, I had initially given Archfey, I think it was like a C or a B. Archfey needs to get a revision. Real hardcore, especially because the Fey Wanderer's been out. This needs a complete rewrite. The Archfey is just having a lot of problems sticking up with like anything else offered in the Warlock. Like, it's even easier to see why so many people pick Hexblade whenever your other options are as weak as the Archfey. Like, Archfey seems like it wants to be the like high control debuff sort of a Warlock, which I think it should be, but all that really winds up happening is that like it's gonna feel like your features just don't really come into play a whole lot at like, man, I would say like 9th level and above. Beguiling Defenses being made immediately weaker just because we saw like a Ranger get a better effect than this offered earlier. Dark Delirium is just possibly the weakest capstone I've seen on a Warlock so far. And then Fey Presence just relying on you having to be like, it's within 10 feet of the creature, and sure, that's a strong effect, and it's way less limited than Charm Person, but like, oh man, like I said, I would so much rather, like, if I was thinking about this defensively, I don't know that I would ever use this offensively, because it puts me at a lot of risk to do that, as a subclass that doesn't get, like, medium armor proficiency, or, like, any improvements to my armor class. Like, I just don't know about Fey Presence, man. And yeah, I would say, like, if I was giving it my, like, kind of subjective thought as, what I think this does narratively, I think it's pretty cool, but, like, I think that Wizards of the Coast should lean a lot heavier into, like, the debuff side of it, rather than, like, relying so heavily on charmed or frightened effects. One thing I would immediately do to this is lean much, much harder into, like, I would try and get away from, like, the theme being charmed or frightened, and get rid of Dominate Beast and immediately throw Confusion on their expanded spell list. Yes, that is it is competing for your concentration, but this is going to affect more creatures in a bigger area. This is an amazing debuff sort of an effect. I've said multiple times, like, I wish that Confused was just a condition in D&D, and then I think that we would see, like, this Warlock get a lot of Confusion-like effects. This might be helped out a little bit by some of the spells that came to us in Tasha's. I know, like, I would certainly change, like, Blink for, like, is Summon Fey a Warlock spell? Okay, it is, okay. So they probably really wanted to make this available to Warlock specifically. But I would really like to see some way, this does need a rewrite, especially considering some of the content that's in Tasha's. Let me know what you all think down in the comment section below. Maybe I'll pull this one up on the next live stream that I talk about, fixing or buffing some subclasses and really get to work on the Archfey. I want to give a shout out to my Patreon sponsors. Thank you all so much for helping me keep the lights on around here and coffee in my blood. You all are absolute heroes. Thank you all for being here. I hope you all are staying safe, staying healthy, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.